Hello, my name is Tejvan Pettinger from Economics Help, and today I'd like to look at the shortage of lorry drivers in the UK. And first of all, it's not a new problem. Back in 2015, I wrote a post about the shortage of lorry drivers. And it's not just a UK problem. We see shortage of lorry drivers in Europe and in America. But of course, in the UK, it's become much more acute in the past year, and it's actually led to shortages in supermarkets and pubs and fast food outlets. So the issue has really risen in the public's awareness. So I think first of all, it's good to look at the long-term issues facing the industry. And I think the fundamental problem is that young people are just not attracted to the idea of a career in driving a lorry. And this is for a few reasons. Relatively low wages, but perhaps more importantly, the perception or the reality of poor working conditions, unsocial hours, away from your family for a long time, sleeping in the back of your lorry, and difficulty for getting good bathrooms and things like that. So young people, if you ask them, very few will say I want to be a lorry driver. There's a much bigger push to get people to university, get a degree or academic qualifications. And in the UK, we've often undervalued vocational qualifications like HD driver. And this affects perhaps the prestige of a job. And some old lorry drivers say there used to be quite a degree of self-respect and prestige in being a lorry driver, whereas these days it's not perhaps seen in quite the same light. And maybe COVID and the current shortages might go some way to changing that. We're realizing how much we rely on lorry drivers. We like to, order our online goods and food, and it seems we can get almost anything we like. But we often forget the role that lorry drivers play in allowing us to have this online shopping experience. So whilst there are these long-term issues facing economies across Europe and the US, why has it become more acute in the UK? Well, firstly, we can't ignore Brexit, because since 2016, the net migration of European workers to the UK has fallen from around 200,000 per year before 2016 to about 40,000 in 2020, and now the figure is estimated to be negative. Eastern Europeans there's a net migration away from the UK. So this is leaving the UK with labour shortages in many areas, but especially lorry driving. And the nature of the Brexit we have is that it is imposing higher costs on lorry drivers. There are more custom forms than before. There are lorry checks at the border. Drivers have to get the Kent area permit pass. So all these to drivers are costs, either time or money. And so if there's plenty of work in Europe, why come to the UK where there's this additional burden, perhaps uncertainty of paperwork, and even perhaps perception that European workers are less welcome than they used to be. Also, on a practical level, the pound is about 16-17% lower than it was before the Brexit vote. So for European workers, their take-home pay is less than it would have been. So the devaluation related to Brexit is also a factor in decreasing supply of European workers. Also, the kind of crisis was exacerbated by COVID, in the sense that in 2020 spring, the economy was furloughed, so a lot of lorry drivers were put on furlough, and so for the European workers, they often preferred to go home. They're going to be furloughed, you might as well be at home rather than staying in the UK. And as the economy has recovered, and it's recovered quite well, especially in logistics, these European drivers who used to work based in the UK are just not returning because of the disincentives by Brexit and the plentiful supply of work on the continent. Another interesting feature about the shortage of lorry drivers is that if you look at it from an economic perspective, you always expect that any shortage will automatically be solved by the free market. If there's a shortage of lorry drivers, wages go up, and this will bridge the shortage. And this has been occurring this year because the shortage is so acute, wages have increased. And in some headlines, I mean, I've seen a few headlines like lorry drivers getting up to £56,000 a year if they work very long hours. And some firms are reporting quite significant one-off increases in wages. But it is worth bearing in mind that despite these temporary increase in wages, it's still a very competitive market. And some logistic firms have been much more reluctant to increase wages. So Tesco's are offering a bonus of £1,000 if you sign up before September. But the underlying wage rate, if you look at it closely, it's not as increasing as much as you might expect. Some firms definitely have increased wages. But there's another issue, is that will this, let's say, moderate or high increase in wages actually solve a problem? And I could ask the question to yourself, would you become a lorry driver if wages were 20% higher? And I think that many people, the answer would be no, because when we're taking a job, the wage is only one factor out of many. And for many workers, being a lorry driver, it's not just about the wages, but about whether you can have a social life, whether you can spend time with your family, and whether you would enjoy it or whether you feel there's prestige to it. So I do wonder whether this temporary increase in wages that we're seeing will actually solve the underlying issue in the economy. And for that to change, we may need to really look into issues such as placing greater value on vocational training, not just lorry drivers, but plumbers, electricians. Do we need to put so much emphasis on getting young people into university? Perhaps we need a way to place greater value and prestige on being a lorry driver. Also, the firms have been quite successful in keeping wages low for a long time. Despite this ongoing shortage of lorry drivers, it's not something new, it's not something that happened just in 2021. Supermarkets have been very good in keeping costs down. Amazon has been subsidizing cost of delivery because it wants to really increase the competitive pressures. So it's been happy to absorb some of the increasing logistic costs just to keep prices low. And this puts pressure on everybody else to keep costs and prices low. But the effect is that lorry drivers are in a difficult position to get wage increases. Even though there's been this persistent long-term shortage, wages are rising less than perhaps you might expect. And some point to a country like the Netherlands, where they've been using collective bargaining to claim higher wages for the industry. Whereas in the UK, it feels very much like firms competing against each other, like offering bonuses to attract workers from the other firm. But this is very much a short-term fix for the particular firm. It doesn't address the long-term issue of shortage of lorry drivers getting trained. And it's worth mentioning the average age in the UK is now 55, and very much an aging population, and many lorry drivers want to retire when they're 60 because it becomes physically difficult to drive when you become older. And so the crisis is really building up perhaps for the future. So to summarize, the shortage of lorry drivers is very real. It has both long-term and short-term causes, and wages are slowly responding by going up, but I feel they're still lagging behind the real equilibrium level to tackle the long-term shortage, and that would take quite a while before we get more young people trained as HGV drivers.